When I was driving across this vast nation this last summer, I passed many cornfields. And cornfields, I realized, are something that I've known in almost every phase of my life. When I was a child, we ate the salt and pepper corn in Massachusetts, and then in my teen years, it was the Jersey corn. I was working for 2 decades in North Carolina. I had statewide jobs. That meant I just kept running from one end to the other of the state, back and forth, and I had favorite cornfields on my way that I would see, particularly like to see the way that they looked and check out whether they had tassels or whether the tassels were turning brown or whether you could see ears. And last summer, in my little garden that I started during the sheltering, I had one very tiny ear of corn. Corn, the rows, the floppy-leaved plants, the development of the ears, and the golden tassels have been a long-time part of my life. This last summer, though, as I was driving across the nation in the van with the dogs, I encountered some surprises. I'd come around one bend and there'd be a cornfield on the right and a cornfield on the left, and yet then all of a sudden the cornfield on the right would be a solar farm. One night, I rounded a corner and headed into an entire landscape of blinking red lights. It was wind turbines and a whole sea of them in the night. I knew the corn was out there somewhere under the turbines. I saw it again the next day. But for a moment, I thought I had stumbled into a nest of sleepy-eyed aliens. In the reddish glow of the lights, I could see that corn waving, growing up, seemingly unbothered by the technology. We are, all of us, in this human existence, in a time of change. And in these times, some wish to discard all that has been given us in the past, and others wish to keep all that's been given to us in the past, even the parts that maybe were never given to us to begin with. Both approaches seem, I think, must have been part of what was happening in those communities when farmers decided to turn their rows of plants into rows of metal and glass. And I wonder about the conversations that happened among some of the people at the feed stores in those days. We think of traditions as that which never change, and yet in reality, our traditions evolve, as we heard this morning in our Time for All Ages, some of them at a slower pace over time, the way that water changes rock, and some of them in a flash, the way that lightning can cleave a tree. I think when we reflect particularly on this Thanksgiving tradition, it's really important to look at the evolution over time, because it indicates some of the things we can keep and take forward as we go. As we shared earlier in our story, in 1789, President George Washington issued a proclamation designating November 26th of that year as a National Day of Thanksgiving to recognize the role of Providence in creating the new United States and the new federal Constitution. And then it became more of a regional holiday for a while. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln again proposed it as a national day, saying, "I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens." He tried, it didn't work. So in 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt made it a national holiday, shortly after the glorified narrative of the Pilgrims and Indians was introduced as a way of making clear that the white Protestant settlers were the rightful owners of these lands to the many, many waves of immigrants that were coming into the nation at the end of the century before. This holiday of Thanksgiving, on the painful 400th anniversary of the beginning of the genocide against the Wampanoag people in what we know now as Massachusetts, is something that many of us now hold with mixed emotions. That narrative, that story, no longer may be of value to many of us. Yet when we dig a little deeper, we may see, as our children's story said, that it's all a little bit more complicated. As David Reynolds wrote in The Atlantic earlier this month, Thanksgiving was, for more than 2 centuries, a northern state affair, celebrated annually at different times in the mid to late fall. In the early 1840s, Sarah Josepha Hale, the editor of Godley's Lady's Book, began using her columns to push for a nationalizing Thanksgiving and celebrating it on the last Thursday in November. Her writing became more and more impassioned as she witnessed the widening rift over slavery, for she saw this National Day of Thanksgiving as a way to bring people together. When division led to civil war, Hale wrote a letter to President Lincoln emphasizing the urgency of making Thanksgiving a national and fixed Union festival, which might not have been the best way to unify people at that time, but she thought that it would add healing to a torn nation. She told Lincoln that by announcing this Union Thanksgiving, the president could ensure the permanency and security of our great American festival of Thanksgiving would be forever secured. This particular Sunday, in this congregation, we have our own tradition, and it is to do our bread and cider communion, which connects us to our Unitarian tradition particularly, and to those of our Unitarian relatives and kin who live particularly in what was formerly Transylvania, now Romania. This is a ritual that we do to connect us to our tradition, and it's a moment to pause and reflect on the power of community to overcome great challenges and losses. A personal tradition that I have had over the years is to bake the bread for this event each year. And because of lots of reasons, including the fact that plating 100 meals is a heck of a lot harder than having a potluck for 100 people, and because supporting small businesses has become really important to me right now in these economic times, this year we're going to have a little twist on our communion. Some people may not want to partake in refreshments at all because of their own concerns and risk tolerance, but if you do, we're going to have a cider and donut communion this year with donuts from Chick's in Concord, one of the small businesses that I want to make sure stay alive. And we also have, of course, gluten-free options and sugar-free options. That's how I spent my time worrying about that, the options, rather than actually baking the bread. But I'll find a time later in the year for the bread, and you'll hear more about the communion in a few minutes. I think we're fortunate to live in a time when we can understand that we don't have to just jettison something or keep it 100% the way we've kept it before. We can do different things, and we can adjust and take a part of a tradition that still has value, such as a day to offer gratitude, or maybe a path to unity. That might be something that has a lot of value for us in this year of 2021. And we can also hold other truths right next to that truth, such as the need to be more honest about our relationships with the indigenous peoples of this land and others among us, including those who also in these times are trying to immigrate to this country. You know, by the end of my drive east last summer, I wasn't really surprised to see anything in a cornfield. Geodesic domes, metal and glass sculptures, even those red glowing eyes that were all around. The corn persists, as does our need to adapt and change in our private and our shared worlds. And I hope that I and we, like the cornfields, have the wisdom to just keep on growing.